All right, thank you, Doug, and good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, and that is Darrell Glenn, and he's the Republican candidate for Senate. Just a couple of background notes about Darrell. Colorado Springs native, Air Force Academy graduate, served 21 years in Air Force and retired as a lieutenant colonel. Since then, he has two daughters, is a practicing attorney in town. He has been active in local Colorado Springs politics and served 2 terms on the city council and 2 terms as a county commissioner. Just for perspective and how I know Darrell, Colorado Springs Utilities is governed by our city council, and so when Darrell was in that role, he was one of our board members for the utilities board, so got a chance to work with Darrell when he served on city council. So really grateful that he's here to join us this morning. Just a reminder on the format. So we'll invite Mr. Glenn up here to give his comments, and then we will follow up with the same prepared questions that we asked of the other candidates, and kind of go forward from there. And then if there's time after that, we can hopefully take a few questions from the public. The questions were developed by the Federal Affairs team, and in part kind of based on our Water Congress federal priorities, and just recognition of other key issues that are currently under discussion at the federal level. So with that, I want to invite Darrell up, and please help me welcome Darrell up.
Well, good morning, everybody. Oh, come on. Good morning, everybody. I was going to say, I'm glad I didn't draw the straw where you're the after-lunch speaker. That's always a tough gig. But I wanted to enjoy that for a second. I had never had Goo Goo Dolls walk-up music before. So you get to experience a lot of things, in this campaign. But I just want to first tell you what a privilege it is to not only serve and, in the elective capacities that I've had, but just to be able to go out there and campaign. Some of my comments from the introductory standpoint, just want to give you a feel of who I am, my style, so that you can understand when it comes to dealing with particular issues, especially if you're concerned, you can understand my perspective. As you said, I grew up in Colorado, and I fell in love with politics at a very young age, in 9th grade when I ran for my first political office. And, I was that little guy running around the house where people were like, what is he doing? What's he talking about? And I just loved political government and things like that. And so I fell in love with the sense of service. That's led to my military career and coming back home afterwards and wanting to get involved in local government. I had the privilege of being able to be on the Colorado Springs City Council. I learned a lot with working with Colorado Springs Utilities. They are great. They're leaders, and it's amazing some of the great and wonderful things that they've done. But before I really get into some of those issues, I started my campaign about 15 months early. We started driving around this state January of 2015. And I did that specifically because what I see happening is there's a growing disconnect between what's happening at the federal level and what's happening down here when you start talking to people. So I wanted to take the time to go out there and really find out what some of the issues are. And universally, people are tired of politicians saying one thing and then getting elected of office and completely forgetting about those promises that they've made on the campaign trail. And then they don't come home and find out the impact of those policies. And then when you go up there to try to talk to them about their concerns, you don't have an opportunity to meet with them face to face. You either don't get a meeting or you meet with their staffs. To me, public service is about customer service, and you are the customers. And what I've seen throughout this entire campaign, I have to periodically remind people that we work for you. If you're not happy about how your government is, hold us accountable. Do not keep rewarding people that are not going to represent you by returning them back into office. So that's really my philosophy. My philosophy is basically reigniting that energy at the local level and get us to realize that more things are done and resolved if you empower local government. So that's what I'm going to really focus in on. Because when we start thinking about, in my particular opinion, the EPA and all these regulators that are out there, I worry about the lack of accountability that we have. I'm concerned about that. When I'm out talking to people, they're concerned about the defense of this country. They're concerned with we need to make a stronger commitment to become energy independent, but they are concerned about the excessive regulations that are having a tremendous impact on our quality of life. And they want more control put back into the lawmakers' hands instead of agencies that are not accountable. And that's something that I'm going to stand up for. So when you start evaluating the various agencies out there, my first thought process is to, number one, what's the constitutional foundation for that particular agency? And if there isn't one, then why are we doing that? We need to rein that in, because I want to make sure that when they're making those impacts that we have the ability to have public input into that process. See, I'm a big states' rights guy. I understand that. I want to be able to empower local government. Like I said, I worked 8 years with the Colorado Springs Utilities. We worked with that Southern Delivery Project. And it got tough at times. But the one thing that I learned throughout that entire process was the importance of local government, the importance of public input. You see some of the restrictions that are coming down at the federal level. Those are some things that we must address, because a lot of times we need to sit around and talk to one another and talk about the impacts that you're having. If you're upstream, you need to understand the impacts that you're having downstream and what some of those issues are. And I think that throughout that entire process, we learned a lot. We learned about permitting. We learned about government overreach in certain areas. We learned about the impacts of endangered species and what that's doing. We learned about when you draw out a project for so long, the capital cost to be able to fix that project continues to go up. We learned that when you're working a project, the best thing that we can give you is the ability to have feedback into that project so you can get some decisions made so you can make corrective actions instead of prolonging this thing indefinitely. These are some of the things that, if you send me to Washington, that I'm going to stand up for, is giving you a stronger voice. That, to me, is what's important. And also, I think it's important to have somebody at my level within my office that has a direct connection to the issues that you are working on. You need to have the ability to have direct input and feedback. We need to be able to have performance measurements that we can look at on a daily basis to determine whether or not we are actually being responsive to the needs that you have. And sometimes we need to get out of your way and let you do your job, because I think that that's a very empowering thing. And I'm going to try to push as much and empower states and local governments to the best ability that I can. That's my commitment, because I believe that we can do a lot of things, but government is not the answer to everything. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the impacts, and I've talked to people about excessive regulations. And we live in a great state. It's a beautiful state. And we all are concerned about the environmental issues. And I think that there's so many opportunities. Instead of us arguing all the time, let's sit down and find, where is that compromise? Where can we actually make sure that the policies that we're implementing are not having a devastating impact on our very own economy? We need to understand that it's great to do certain things, but we also need to understand, how does that translate into a single family that's trying to sit down and pay their bills? There's a balancing test that we need to incur and really analyze. And that's something what I'm trying to commit. Because I don't know about you, I'm a little frustrated with the dialogue in this election season. I mean, I understand it's the best reality show out there, but I don't know about you, but I don't believe that we are setting the example that we should be setting for the next generation. And I'm holding my campaign accountable in the fact that we've got to change. We've got to change the rhetoric, because we're not going to agree on every issue. But it's about respect. It's about how we talk to one another. It's about making sure that we have an opportunity to sit down and talk about real-world issues that are impacting our daily lives, coming up with a solution, and then trying to implement a process, monitor that process, and determine whether or not it's working, and then be willing to make those changes. Where in there do we start talking about you have to be a Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated? I must have missed that memo. I'm an American. I'm a patriot. I think we need to stop worrying about so much the labels and start worrying about how can we get together as a country and resolve these issues in the right way. So that's the message that I'm going to be bringing forward. And I think that it's very relevant to the issues that you are dealing with right now. And I applaud you for being here. I applaud you for raising your hand and elevating issues that we must address in Colorado. Because in my opinion, we have a perfect opportunity. My slogan is, I think that it's time for Colorado to lead. There are so many different areas that we should be leading because we're doing so many great things right now. We can make some improvements, but let's be proud of who and what we are. Let's lead as Coloradans. So with that, I want to start going into your questions, but I really felt it was important for you to understand my perspective, the accountability that I'm holding on this campaign, and my commitment to making sure that if I'm there as your representative, you have somebody that understands, because they grew up at the local level in Colorado Springs, at the city council level, so I understand land use regulations. I understand what's going on with EPA. I understand excessive regulations, what that does. But most importantly, I understand how empowering it is for you to have a voice. And that's what we're going to do. So let's go.
Thank you, Commissioner. So there's been a long-running discussion about reforming or modernizing the Endangered Species Act. But a wholesale overhaul of ESA does not have broad-scale political support. Taking a more laser-like incremental approach, what 3 things would you do to make the ESA less impactful to efforts to manage and develop our water supply in the West?
Well, and this starts with my own framework on how I analyze issues. You still have to go back to what was the original intent? What was the purpose? What's the foundation? Number one, is that something that should be done at the federal level? Number 2, what specifically were the objectives of that particular task that was out there? Because that's what's extremely important. Because we need to have clarity of purpose. You know, when you start thinking about the Endangered Species Act, it was designed for a specific intent. So are we, as we've seen it evolve over the years, is it fulfilling that specific intent? And I would ask, you know, silly me, when I think about endangered species, why do we do that? We do that because you're trying to protect, whether it's plant life or certain animals or whatever. So you develop in my opinion, it should be a narrowly tailored policy designed to accomplish that objective. But when you're deciding who and what falls within that act, you need data. You need verifiable information that's confirmed, not opinion. You need data that's backed up where we all have a level of consensus that, yes, this is something that should be protected. And then it should be if government is going to actually get in there and regulate that, it should be government's responsibility to, number one, monitor that regulation is occurring and give us feedback so that we can have buy-in to that process, and it should be government's responsibility to then delist it. You know, in my community, we had the Preble's jumping mouse. We're still waiting to see one, personally, but it does exist. But what we want to see is how are we doing with that process, because it does have an impact. It does have an impact on your land development decisions. So if you're going to designate something as, endangered, how's it doing? If it eventually gets to the point where it's not endangered, is it going to come off the listing so you can return property rights back? It shouldn't be on you to have to bring a lawsuit to be able to fix that. I don't think that that's right. So again, start with the framework of you better have a charter to be able to do that. You need to understand what that is. You need to have measurable objectives to be able to, you're monitoring that process. And then you need to have public input into that process to make sure that it's doing its intended purpose. And I think once we do that, we will be in a better position to analyze those particular areas. And in nowhere in there does it mean that we don't care about the environment. We absolutely care about the environment, but we want to make sure that we are not also stifling development and impacting personal property and business interests and hurting our own economy when we don't have verifiable data to substantiate what we're trying to protect. So that's how I would handle that.
All right. Thank you. Next question. The Forest Service, I'll probably get too close to the speaker here. Sorry.
Come on, I love you, man.
All
you
right.
can come closer.
I want to take the stage. Share, yeah. The Forest Service ski area proposed rules, EPA USGS proposed hydrologic alterations guidelines, and EPA's Waters of the US rule are just the most recent and higher profile rules and regulations to be issued by the administration. And they at least seem to concentrate control over Western water in the federal agencies and not with the states or local agencies. What will you do to rein in agencies' overreach in this area?
There are a couple things that can be done, and this is why this is a very important election, because some of these things actually get litigated. As a person that has a legal background, don't hold that against me. But I think it's extremely important that when you have justices that make decisions, that I am a strict constructionist. I believe in the intent of the Constitution. I don't believe that it evolves with administrations based on political philosophies. You need to have a framework that you can refer back to. So you need to, if you end up in court, be able to have sound constitutional principles, a justice that understands the importance of that. So that's the first thing that you can do. But you also need to recognize that what's happening is political philosophy is being used to create government overreach. You're being held hostage when you start talking about permits, and they want more control. As a commissioner, we're dealing and battling against Waters of the U.S. Basically want to designate everything, as something that has a federal interest. And we need to hold our policymakers accountable that they can't do that. That's not right. It should not be federally controlled on certain areas. You can't designate a certain puddle as a navigable waterway and the federal government has control over that. I mean, we need to use a little common sense. So we need to push back on those legislators that are doing that. We need to push back on those agencies that are promoting that and start removing some of that rulemaking authority and putting it back on the legislators and hold them accountable. And if they aren't going to listen to us, we need to get them out of office. That's how I'm going to approach that, because I recognize with the ski industry and what they're trying to do, when you bring up your permit and everything, they want to be able to control you. They want to negotiate with you and give up more control. That's why I say you be careful when people say, hey, I'm the government and I'm here to take care of you and help you. They want something in return. It's called the tax and spending provision of the Constitution. If they give you something, then they can control you. I want to make sure you're empowered at the state level. Let the states get more involved. Let the states dictate more rules and regulations, because they're more accountable at the local level and have more impactful change. So I'm always going to push for that.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, do you anticipate that the next Congress will make any changes to the Clean Water Act or other environmental laws that will still accommodate the goals of those laws while acknowledging the impacts of climate change?
I love that question, because how you answer that question is a question back to you. You really have to ask yourself, what do you want to change? Or do you believe that we do need to change? Because, again, it goes back to my whole opening and the fact that you're the government. We're just agents of it. If you don't believe we're doing the right thing with our policies, then you have the opportunity to make that change. So the question is whether I believe Congress is going to do those particular things. It just determines, it comes down to whether you dictate and give people a mandate to implement certain changes. Because I want to continue to emphasize this point, and I'll use an example here. I'm from El Paso County. If you remember, we had a devastating fire. The Black Forest Fire was in my commissioner district, lost 14,000 acres, almost 500 homes, lost 2 people. And I learned a lot throughout that process. I spent a lot of time going out, creating community meetings and just talking to people. And they had this glazed look in their eyes because they felt hopeless. And part of my job was to remind them that, guess what? You're in charge. Because what was happening is you saw people being taken advantage of. They saw inefficiencies within FEMA. You saw insurance agencies doing a lot of overreach. You saw out-of-state contractors, and they were asking, well, what can government do? And I felt it was my job at that point in time to remind you that we work for you. And if there are certain things that are happening and there are certain outcomes that you want done, then you need to be organized with regard to a particular position to advocate for. Find a representative that's willing to stand up and be held accountable, that actually follows through on those promises, and then hold that person accountable. And when we do those things, then yes, all the changes are going to occur, but we need to understand as a country it's about two things in this campaign. It's about, number one, it's about reestablishing trust, because trust has been broken, because so many commitments have been made and have been broken between elected officials and the people that they serve. And the second thing is belief. Belief in the fact that your voice and your vote matters. And when you do that, you are going to be empowered to make those changes. So that's what we're going to do to fix this government that we love so much and that we love watching commercials about, and you're going to see a lot of them here pretty soon.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we have Doug. I'm not sure if Doug's in here, but
Sure.
have time for a couple of questions?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I will bring a microphone over to anybody that has a question. And come on.
This is such a shy group. I've never been in front of a shy group. If you keep it up, I'm going to start telling jokes, and you don't want me to do that.
Okay, there's.
I work for him.
Yeah.
What is your favorite color?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate that. I was wondering, what is your position or belief or non-belief in climate change and how that would affect your policies? We are naturally concerned in some areas about that affecting water.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. And that's where I say words mean things. I think we all, when you're sitting here paying attention, the climate is changing. I think where we need to have more of a discussion, and an open-minded discussion, is our ability to impact that. And I think it's a fair discussion. But what we also need to do is, when we're having that policy discussion, we also can't ignore the other side of the equation. We have to have a balancing test of what's happening, because there's only so much we can do in certain areas when you start talking about regulations without having a disproportionate impact on our own economy and our own families. And what I think we need to do a better job is stop talking at this level and the partisan rhetoric where we're saying, well, you don't support climate change or you do this. Yeah, I mean, we've all heard it before. Let's focus in on the issues. Let's focus in on what can we actually measure as far as our particular impact, and how does that stack up against the impact of that on our jobs and our families that we're here? Because both need to work together in order for us to be successful. And that's really where I want to focus the debate, because both parties are extreme when we're arguing these particular issues, because they stay out there in the fringe instead of getting down and dealing with what can we actually do and what can we actually measure. So you have my commitment to bringing the discussion back to the level of what we can actually do, measure, and impact, and what's in the best interest of this country.
Another question right over here.
Yes, very quickly, do you believe that the United States should have open borders?
That's great for a water conference. He had some coffee this morning, right? No, that's good. No, I think that's a fair question. No, I don't. I think every country should have, be able to control access to it. That doesn't mean that you're not compassionate, because I would throw that back. How many of you believe that you should have a home without a lock? Because that really is the question. You have the ability to be able to have a home, and I don't know anybody that builds a home and they don't put a lock. Why do you put a lock on the door? You want to be able to control access to your home. That doesn't mean that you could be the best neighbor out there. You could bake cookies and do all these types of things, have the best party ever, but at the end of the day, you still lock your door. And I think we lose sight of that, and that's where I say the rhetoric kind of skews that issue. It's extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, to realize the fact that there is evil in this world. There are people that do not respect or care for our way of life, and that they are trying to infiltrate this country. Some may even be here and do us harm. So we need to make sure that we have a way of identifying those people that want to do that, so that we can protect ourselves. Just like when you're a family, you're sitting there with your kids. You don't want to be safe at home. You want to make sure you allow your children to grow up in a safe and loving environment. And that's why you control access to that home. You control access to those influences to your kids. And that's really, when we start talking about the issue at that level, instead of all the hyper-partisan rhetoric, people get it. And I believe that we're in more agreement than possible. And I believe that people are out there trying to score political points on both sides that aren't really willing to address the issue. And I want to get people focused in on what we can actually do. We are a great country. We are a free and loving country. We want people to come here the right way, want to stay here and be a part of that. We would open up our homes and help a lot of people because we care. We have love. We have compassion. But what we also want to do is make sure that we're safe. And that's really what I'm going to focus in. I want to make sure that each and every one of you feel safe, and each and every one of you are your own first responder, and that's why you have a lock on your door.
Right, thank you. A couple more questions, one right here.
Thank you. Immediately after taking office, what are the top several Colorado water-related issues that you would take on?
Well, and again, I think you got to be broader than that. I mean, it's real easy to do that because the issues are going to have an impact on water. Because it's really the role of the federal government is kind of lay the foundation to allow for the normal function of government, because I believe there's too much government overreach. There's not enough state control. So how do we do that? You first make sure that we realize we have vacancies that are going to occur on the Supreme Court. So you need people that are going to be there that are strict constructionists that understand the Constitution. That will help water law. Secondly, you need to recognize the fact that we must look at the regulations, the excessive regulations, in my opinion, that are having a disproportionate impact on our ability to address a lot of issues, because too much of the rulemaking authority has been given to unelected agencies, and it needs to be brought back to the legislators so we can hold them accountable, because there's a lack of public input into that process, which is having a devastating impact on water law and a variety of other areas. So when we do those things, then your job is going to be much easier, and as you work, Colorado is going to lead.
Right, thanks. Donna?
Move out of this light. Nothing worse than having a bald head and a bright light. I'm getting a double glare here today.
This is also a non-water question. I want to thank you for your service. I'm an Army mom, and I would like to know what you have in mind to fix the VA.
Oh, I love that. I wish you have these questions, what would you do if you were king for a day? I could fix the VA in 24 hours. I would make every member of Congress and the president have to use the VA system. That would fix the problem right then and there, because there are too many people that are being elected in office, and they're exempting themselves from a lot of the policies and things that they have to go through. And if they had to go through and realize that they are just like you will be surprised how lean and efficient things comes. Your appointment time will dramatically increase. And that's really, we need to focus in on the customer, and that's the soldiers that are out there. And that's why I say that as a joke, but it's true. And the fact that we know that is sad, and the reason why they're getting away with it is because we're allowing them to get away with it. Ladies and gentlemen, you have an opportunity in this election to demand change. That's why I'm also going to be sponsoring two particular things that are near and dear to my heart. I think it's extremely important to have national term limits, because you see so many people that are there and they're just focused on staying there instead of coming home and living under the very laws that they've been willing to pass. And the second thing that we must do is adopt a balanced budget amendment. So you're going to see me advocating for those two things, because we can't do a lot of the other things without bringing some stability to the basic fabric and foundation of our government. And I'm going to stand up. I have an Army mom, and she loves to remind me that she was the first one to make a lieutenant colonel in the family. So I'm going to make sure we honor that commitment.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Commissioner Glenn,
Great.
we really want to thank you for taking some time out of your schedule today to be here. Let's everybody give Commissioner Glenn a big round of applause.
Thank you guys so much. It is absolutely my privilege.